All right. Hey, folks, welcome back to the Kangaroo Leadership Podcast. Today, we've got Eric Brazau, and I think that you're going to find that we're going to go all over the map. Eric's got some deep, dark thoughts about some deep, dark things, and we're gonna have a discussion that hopefully drives some introspection with you, maybe some disagreement, but you know that it's very near and dear to me that we challenge people. But one of my keynotes is closing the 25-yard gap. And you can't just close a 25-yard gap with groupthink and people that are exactly like you. You have to be able to get into rooms with people that think a different way. So without further ado, hey, Eric, tell us about you, where you're from, and all the things that we talked about when we chatted prior to the podcast, and we'll just get on with it.
Sure. Originally, I'm from Montreal. I'm living now in Toronto for the last 20 years. I studied theater performance as a young man. I was involved as a director, etc. I was very artsy-fartsy, but I was also always, if you could say, contrarian or leaning to the right. Sometimes I leaned to the left. So I would have conversations with friends or just debates with people who would say, "Are you a leftist or a rightist?" And I would always say, well, good ideas come on both sides. It's not a question of my left or my right. And so, and again, as a young man studying acting, theater, Shakespeare, and I had to understand the lifestyle. I would read Grotowski, Russian writers. So I was exposed to different things that most people aren't. So my education as a young man was very eclectic, right? I did read some philosophy. I read, but again, as I say, Chekhov, Russian writers, Strindberg, etc. Then 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, it's not that I was pro Islam in any sense of the word or pro what happened, but I was, well, again, being the contrarian, because everybody was on one side of the debate at that moment, I was, well, it looks like America got a punch in the nose, and who cares about. I was just being maybe silly to be silly, just to be contrary to everybody around me. So here I am in Montreal, 1991, 92, no, 93 or so, 94. I'm riding my bike in an area called Notre Dame de Grace, and out from a van came two men with a red beard, wearing the white, what we would call the pajamas style. But three women exited the van completely in black, from head to toe, gloves, face, completely covered. And when I saw that, it was the first time I saw that in Canada. We're going back 93, 94. It was like a punch in the gut. I literally took my breath away. Like, what the hell? What's that? It looked so ominous. That evening, I was at work discussing my emotions in my sight to a female. And the female took umbrage to me not appreciating the cultural diversity that this culture brings. And I said, are you crazy? How could women enjoy wearing total blackness? That makes no sense. To which she replied, well, you don't know that. Who do you think you are? You're just a white supremacist, racist, blah, blah. What? But they're women. Why would they want to be in 90 degrees temperature wearing complete blackness? Again, I was 30 years old. She was 40, 45. So I deferred, thinking, wait a second, maybe I'm crazy. But then I thought, but no, maybe she's crazy. I was confused.
Right.
Again, I'm 30 years old. She's 40. I gave her the benefit of the doubt and respect, of course. Fast forward, I come to Toronto. It's 2001, 2, 3, somewhere around there. I'm in a restaurant late evening. It's like 11:30 at night. It turned out it was like a taxi stand.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to this restaurant, like, it's been 6 months now. It's after my hockey games. So it's the only restaurant open in my neighborhood. And so I'm talking to all of these, chit-chatting. I can't remember what. And at that point, there was an issue that they were going to bring into Toronto family tribunals. So instead of going to the court system, you would go to a religious tribunal that would be run by the imams under Sharia law. And at that point, I thought, so I'm talking to these taxi drivers. many of whom have big beards, big burly guys. And I said, well, of course, nobody wants to bring Sharia law to Canada, right? And they looked at me and said, no, we do. We want Sharia law. To which I responded, but of course, no drinking, no alcohol, the women, the blackness, and nobody wants Sharia law. And they looked at me and they said, look, we don't joke about Sharia law. We are Muslims. And as Muslims, we want Sharia law. And I realized that these guys weren't making a joke. I stopped talking. At that point, I thought to myself, do Muslims here in Canada want to bring Pakistan, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, to bring Islam to be the dominant force in Canada? And it turned out that they do, or many of them do. To which I had a bad feeling. I started doing research on YouTube. This was at the beginnings of YouTube, and I just learned more and more and more. And the more I learned from these imams in Qatar, Yemen, Pakistan, etc., I got a very bad feeling. In 2012, you might remember the Benghazi affair. Okay, so Hillary Clinton, there was the whole thing about the movie called Innocence of Muslims that was made by some Copts.
Sure.
Does that ring a bell?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm with you.
Okay, yeah. So Hillary Clinton went on some CNN or somewhere and gave an apology that the First Amendment is not meant to denigrate the noble religion of Islam. To which that freaked me out big time. I made up some flyers, highly problematic, very insulting, at the most that I could find on both sides, and I printed it with a graphic designer. At the bottom, I said, "Not suitable. Will be not suitable for Muslims. It will not suitable for viewing under 18." Something like a trigger warning.
Sure.
I gave these out. I was literally ballistic. I'm in downtown Toronto. I'm outside mosques giving out these flyers to big burly guys. I'm giving this to people on the street, not covering my face, saying my name and out screaming, like sometimes screaming, talking, debating, but mostly screaming. My name is Eric. I went to the University of Toronto, Ryerson University on campus, giving out flyers, 20, 30 people standing around me. My name is Eric Brazau. This is my art. This is my expression. If you don't like it, you can come and stab me. But this is my art. 2 weeks later, I was arrested by the police. I was charged with willful promotion of hate, and they thought about charging me with incitement to commit genocide, but they dropped that one. So it was a saga. So for the next 5 years, I was in jail for 3 of those years. The final episode was the Paris attacks, the shootings in Paris, that they shot 500 people, 140 dead. Okay, again, I went ballistic. At that point, I was arrested. I was in jail for 10 months. Originally, they charged me with incitement to commit genocide, willful promotion of hate. Eventually, it all got dropped to causing a disturbance. So I was in jail for 10 months in maximum security for causing a disturbance outside in the open with my own voice. And you can only scream so loud. I mean, trucks are passing by, ambulances. So my voice is not causing that much of a disturbance, but my message was disturbing. In 2017, I was pushed by a angry mob of Canadians, no Muslims, into a fountain because I was making a statement. And upon my statement, after getting thrown into the fountain, the story went viral. There was only one organization that came to and made a tweet to protect and said, we do not condone violence. We don't agree with this message, but nobody should have violence for what it is that they want to promote because we believe in freedom of speech. It was not a church. It was not the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. The only one who came and made a tweet, and when I say it was a viral story, for me getting pushed into the fountain, it went to all over Europe. It was in Saudi Arabia. It was front page everywhere. With the National Council of Canadian Muslims. And then I thought to myself, wait a second, National Council of Canadian Muslims made this tweet? What I realized at that point was this a sincere tweet, or were they using this as a propaganda to promote their, an agenda that they want to promote? So I said, okay. I made an announcement on YouTube, on all media platforms, that I, Eric Brazau, I renounce my past indiscretions. I am no longer an Islamophobe. I am now on a journey to discover the true Islam based solely on North American, Canadian, authentic, diverse Muslim sources. Together, ensemble, we will fight the phobias that are conflated with Islamophobia. So since then, that was, again, 2017, I have been researching what Islam is based on what Muslim scholars say Islam is. So I don't try to interpret what the Quran says, because the Quran says so many problematic things.
Mm-hmm.
But then someone can say, well, Eric, you don't speak Arabic, you're not a Muslim, there's context. Okay, fine. So I have a database. I've uploaded 750 little clips to my YouTube channel. I have maybe 100,000 and more of those in my hard drive of imams in Canada and North America. I don't focus on imams or Islam in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Yemen, or Afghanistan, Pakistan, Tajikistan. Because the argument always goes, those or that Islam over there is not the same as our Islam over here in Canada and North America. Because that Islam over there is the extreme Islam. That's the no good Islam. Here in Canada, we have a different Islam. Okay, if you say so. So now I focus on Canada and North America. And what I have come to understand is that Islam that we call ISIS and Al-Qaeda exists in a lot of the pockets in the teachings here in North America. So when someone says, we don't like extreme Islam, we don't like political Islam. Well, okay, maybe you don't like it, but political Islam, extremist Islam, Muslim Brotherhood Islam, the Islamic teachings that they should take, that all Muslims are duty bound to take over North America, Canada, Western Europe, and turn it into an Islamic caliphate, is preached in 90% of mosques. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Not for me to say, but it is what it is. That's the reality.
So let's unpack a little bit of this, because right now my listeners are going, "Holy cow, Dave has a anti-Muslim extremist on his show who was set off by the fortitude of some imams that he talked to in Toronto." And the more you talk, the more it makes me kind of smile, because the Kangaroo Leadership podcast is predicated around people that the kangaroos physically can only move forward, so they have to have courage, they have to have vision, they have to have insight, those type of things. And so what you told me was you started in a place that you were of concern, right? You said out loud, "Hey, I'm this concerns me, it scares me." So instead of being scared of something, you started to educate yourself on something. So I want everybody to take that point, that as soon as Eric said, "This doesn't seem right, it doesn't feel right, I don't know anything about it," instead of turning to pure hate, speculation, assumption, and his bias, and going out and saying whatever he wanted to say, at least he started to educate himself on what Islam is. Then you started to talk about people that wanted things to look like they want that they do. So you're talking about Sharia law. They wanted Sharia law. Well, that's what they know, and it doesn't matter if they're in Saudi Arabia or if they're in Toronto, Canada, or they're in Minneapolis, Minnesota. They wanted that. So that's a natural thing, but it also invaded your space because it wasn't what you knew, and all you knew, this is my space, and if that comes here, that's going to require some change or some oddities in my life that require me to cohabitate. And we as human beings don't like cohabitation. So because you didn't like cohabitation, you did more research and you tried to understand. And now you're down to, oh, wait a minute. The Muslim religion isn't an all one thing, and they read the Quran and they go by things. Christians will tell you that the Muslim religion starts at the separation of Abraham and his bad choices with his housekeeper, right? And so the Muslim religion is spun off of the offspring from that relationship versus with his wife, which is what the Lord Jesus talks about as far as the right side. So the Bible kind of highlights that. The Quran kind of highlights the other side. The Quran is full of a lot of rules. If you do this, and this, you'll get to heaven. The Bible doesn't say there's any rules. You just need to, follow the Lord and believe in Him. So there's a whole separation and all of that. So I say all of that, Eric, to say, were you mad? Were you concerned? Why did you feel compelled, even to this point in time? Why did you feel compelled to have this conversation? I've lived in a lot of those places you talked about. I've lived either close to or lived in, for a significant amount of time. So talk to me more about where you start to get to separating this, because as you separate it, there's a lesson in here for everybody, and it's a societal lesson and it's a leadership lesson, because just because you're talking to somebody doesn't lump them into a big giant thing that makes them somebody that's going to blow up the World Trade Center.
Can I? Okay, okay, great. So primary principles, which upon which everyone builds their opinions, their arguments, or their assumptions. Islam is not a person, and people are not Islam. Make sense? So I understood that Islam is different from individual Muslims. Now, I could meet a nice, for example, and I use this example, if I met a nice lady who bakes cookies for the local kindergarten school, and she has this nice little neat garden in front of her house growing vegetables, and she gives those away to passerbys, but she was a card-carrying member of the Nazi Party, and she loved the Nazi Party, but she's a nice person. There's two different things here. There's the ideology of what is Nazism, what does that stand for, and then there's her, the person. Similarly, we could have someone who's a very mean, sourpuss person who's grouchy and unpleasant, but he's a Christian. He identifies as a Christian. Could I therefore say, because I like the lady, the grandmother who bakes cookies, therefore, because she identifies as a Nazi, therefore Nazism itself is a wonderful, nice ideology? I could not do that. Similarly, if a Christian is a crotchety, prickly person who's unpleasant, doesn't necessarily mean that Christianity as an ideology is a crotchety, prickly, unpleasant religion. It's two different things. Similarly, and I think this, to a large extent, puts me different from everyone else who discusses all topics on Islam, whether they be security analysts, whether they be university professors. And believe me, I've listened to them all obsessively for the last 12 years. No one makes that distinction. So what I say is this: what does Islam itself say Muslims need to do to be good Muslims? 95% of all Muslims will say that the Quran and the Sunnah and the Hadith and the life of the Prophet Muhammad is how we should we should make that our lives. That's how we should live. Then we go back and I study, well, what is it that the madrasas, the private Muslim schools here in Canada, tell Muslim children how it is that they should live? They should live as the Sahaba did, the Rashidun, meaning the first four caliphates. So you had Muhammad, Abu Bakr, Omar, Uthman, Ali. How did they live? What was Islam in the first 300 years? That is, according to all of the schools teaching children, the perfect Islam. That's the Islam to be emulated. That Islam does, the whole, whatever you think about Sharia law in its best or worst manifestations, that's the first 300 years of Islam. 900 years, 1100 years, 1200 years. Now, we in the West might not like that, but that is the duty of all Muslims to bring about. Now, how and what some Muslims will do to bring that about, they will do that to the best of their abilities. So if you're a Muslim taxi cab driver, you don't have a lot of political influence. You don't have a lot of money. So what can you do to bring that about? Then again, if you're an engineer, a doctor, and you've been around for 20 years, you have a lot of prestige, you go into politics. So each to his ability. But no one will do. So Catherine Bullock said at Osgoode Hall, she was giving a speech, they were talking. Osgoode Hall is, it's like a courthouse and there's also a place, it's where the lawyers have their assembly. She was telling them that it is all Muslims want to live by the Sharia because living by the Sharia is a perfectly normal point of view. But the problem is that in the UK, a Muslim who says that he wants to live by the Sharia is considered an extremist. But that's not extreme because that's perfectly normal. So, and what I'm getting at is the line, who decides where is extreme, where is normal, where is moderate? So I come to the weather. Is 20 degrees Celsius moderate, or is it warm, or is it cold? Now, if you just came out of the Caribbean, somewhere deep South America, and I brought you to 20 degrees Celsius, you go, oh my God, this is so refreshing. But if I brought you from, living in the sub-Siberia, Alaska somewhere, and, you're used to minus 15 or 30, and I brought you into 20 degrees Celsius, you'd start sweating bullets because it's so hot. So who decides what is extreme, moderate, or normal Islam? Normal, or what we call the mainstream, as opposed to the tributary, the mainstream is the bulk of the water. So the bulk of Islamic doctrine, the bulk of the madrasas, the bulk of the imams, the bulk of the teachings is what? That's what my book explores. That's what I explore. I say not what I believe Islam is or to be. I only say what the imams say Islam is. And the imams here in Canada are saying, yes, the Taliban has a perfect right to tell their women not to leave the house because that's what they want it to be, and that's Sharia law. And therefore, all Muslims in Canada should be happy that the Taliban is implementing the Sharia, because eventually we will have the Sharia implemented in Canada. God willing, of course. But that's the goal. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? That's not for me to say. I don't say that. I just tell you what it is. Similarly, the way a zoologist will tell you, and the crocodile has a tail, and he's got teeth, and this is the way they hunt. This is the way they eat. It's not good, it's not bad, it's a crocodile. The lion is now ripping apart the belly of the antelope to feed his children. Now, some people might look at that, oh my God, the poor antelope is getting eaten. Well, sure, but that's the cycle of life. That's just a reality. So, Islam is a reality.
Eric, I got to challenge you on history, though.
Sure.
Because if you believe in religious history and you go back to the time of Jesus, the time of Abraham, when God told Abraham that he was going to give him a son, right?
Sure.
And Abraham and his wife were in their 90s, and Abraham got impatient, right? And he didn't think God was going to fulfill his promise. And so he thought that he needed to take it into his own hands. And to expedite that, he slept with their maid. They had a son.
Okay.
Later, Abraham's wife becomes pregnant. Those two boys are the opposite sides of Christianity and the Muslim religion. So when you look at that, here's where I want to challenge you. Christians, folks listening, if you want to understand how to do international relations and have any opportunity to have any conversation in the Middle East between Israel and any other true Muslim countries that are truly Muslim. And I say that because in the United States, we have a Muslim population, but we are not a Muslim country. It's a whole different thing. So if you haven't done it, you haven't lived it, you haven't been there, then it's very obtuse to understand. Eric's going to help you with this. But the conversation fundamentally will never come together and be fully understood because Christians look at Muslims as following the wrong path to heaven, the wrong path to eternal life, because they took the teachings and they turned it into rules. And when you have rules, people and you enforce the rules. I've seen it. I've seen it on the streets of Riyadh. I've seen it in the streets of Qatar. I've seen it. I've watched it. In fact, I talk to American women about this all the time. When you have rules and they are truly enforced, there is no moving of the line. It doesn't matter who you are or what you are. When you break the rules, there's consequences. These consequences to Western people are extreme. These consequences to Christians we don't understand them. And the reason we don't understand them is because we want to live a life of Jesus Christ. We want to try to walk in his footsteps and emulate it as best we can. Now, we know we're all sinners and it's very difficult for us to do that. But when we do that, that is counterintuitive to the way even the average Muslim, the true Sharia Muslims, walk the planet. So when I teach leadership, I tell people you've got to close a 25-yard gap. You have to have conversations with people and you have to do a basic level of understanding. You've taken that to the mega Elon Musk, flying to the moon extreme. So, and not that you're an extremist, but you've taken it to deep, deep, deep knowledge base. So I'm going to challenge you because you need to explain. The majority of the people that are going to listen to this, Eric, are not Muslim. Right. You need to explain to the Christians out there, even the non-believers out there who just think they think the Muslim religion is a political organization because it's portrayed that way in the press. Okay. They don't understand the deep things that drive the Muslims to want Sharia and to want that structure.
Let me.
Sure.
Okay. So you said, if I remember, people believe that Islam is a political movement, correct?
What I said is that people that haven't studied the religion and understand its origins and why it's structured the way it is and why the Quran is written the way it is, think that when you say Muslim, you're almost talking about a country, like you're talking about Norway and Afghanistan.
Sure. Okay. Please,
that's not the case.
Let me jump in here. Okay. So you'll notice you haven't heard me, or I don't talk about what do Muslims believe. I don't go there. All I talk about is what do the imams say Islam is. So I talk about Islam itself as an ideology and a religion. Again, I come back to not to jump the shark, as they say, but not every Nazi was a Nazi because he believed in it. He could be because there was the only way he can get a job. It was the only way he could not get killed. Not every soldier. I mean, you'll know there were many attempts on Hitler's life during World War II. There were a lot of Germans who were disgusted with Hitler.
Sure, okay. Exactly.
Okay, very good. So, but that does not change what Nazism is. So I don't talk about Germans or individual Nazis. I don't talk about Muslims or the Muslim. I talk about Islam as an ideological religious movement, in which all religions and all ideologies are a movement of some sort.
And Catholicism is the best example of that.
Very good. So at some point, the question then becomes, I'm not ever going to say that Islam, the ideology, is wrong. That's not my business. I'm not talking about it from that perspective. I'm saying is, what is it that Islam will bring to Western civilization? What is it that it wants to bring to Western civilization? And do I prefer Christianity, Western civilization, or do I prefer Middle Eastern Islamic civilization?
So you have to unpack it, Eric, because you know what people like about Islam? They want shawarmas. They want food.
Is that
No,
a
I'm
joke?
serious. No. But what I'm saying is when you say that and you say, "Hey, Islamic people are moving into my environment, and they live in a neighborhood or they live in something," people go, "Oh, good, we can have
Sure. Okay.
if they've experienced that, right? We can have that." So
Sure.
they look at that as a cultural thing. Now it's back to a cultural thing. You're going to have to explain to everybody why
Okay.
Islamists want to move from their traditional tribal things, because you got to go back to the Ottoman Empire and how all that was sliced up, and
Right.
it chopped
Right.
up all the tribes, which drove migration. So now they've migrated off of the continent where Islam was created. They
Okay.
migrate. Why do they want to come here?
Okay.
Why is it
So
okay for us to
again,
be mixed?
when you ask me, like, okay, very good. So the religion of Islam mandates that it is the duty of all Muslims to do what they can to make the world under the auspices of Islamic religion, period,
Mm-hmm.
in whichever way they can. Now, is it a 10-year plan, a 50-year plan, a 100-year plan? It's a forever plan. That's
Mm-hmm.
so. Are they doing something from their perspective? The Imam Abdul Hamid in Toronto uploaded a video 12 years ago, 15 years ago, which I have, it's spread around a bit. He said very clearly, we do not want to take over for the sake of taking over or to enslave the people. But what we want to do is to take over to make it better. But in order to make it better, we will have to take over in one respect, so to speak. So from the perspective of the non-Muslims, it will seem like we took over. He said that clearly. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? So, but that is a thing. At some point, it is their duty. Now, what a lot of people don't understand, and I'll add this thing before you jump in here,
Right.
is is in Christian, and I don't want to go into the religious aspect because I'm not a theologian. I don't want to go there. But I do know
Sure.
enough about Christianity to say that if someone doesn't want to be a Christian, that is not taken, at least it's not in the doctrine of Christianity, that someone who rejects Christianity deserves to be killed or should be killed. That's not Christian doctrine, but that is Islamic doctrine. That there's a
So so I want you to continue to unpack this, because here's the question I think the listeners will have
sure.
is, you said some things there. First of all, you used the word takeover. So when you say takeover and people,
I
that's
no,
being
I didn't.
invaded.
No,
No,
wait.
no,
I didn't
no,
say
no.
the Imam said. The
But
Imam.
right.
Very good.
In
Go
your
ahead.
teachings here, the imam said take over. So those are fighting words mainly, right? Because if people are being taken over, it means that you're going to fundamentally change your way of life. The
Sure.
second thing is we need to remember societally, right? Most people, here's what people know about the Muslim religion. It's complex. If you even start to delve, and you're way deeper in it than I am, but I live there, so I tended to ask a lot of questions and to try to find out as much as I could. Here's what people know about the Muslim religion, Eric. They tore down some buildings in New York City.
Hmm.
We spent national treasure at ungodly amounts of money to find Osama bin Laden and kill him. A bunch of the radical portions of the Muslim religion, funded and supported by Iran, just went into Israel just a little over a year ago and did some really atrocious things. That's all people know about the Muslim religion. So when the imam says things like we need to take over, people will feel like they're taking over, but it's for their own good. When people migrate into your space, what you want them to do is to bring something that's positive and to in some way, shape, or form assimilate to the environment that they're coming in. You don't want people to move. I experience this in Montana all the time, because we have people moving here from all over the place, and the traditional Montanans don't like the cultural changes because it's not really in their in how they see things, and it's uncomfortable. So you're going to have to unpack that for the
Can
for the
I
folks,
add
because
something here? You brought up the word assimilate. Assimilate.
yeah.
So for the last several years, I've downloaded videos from imams speaking in English here in Canada, North America, even in Europe, who
Mm.
very clearly say we must not assimilate. We must
Yeah.
send our children to the Muslim schools because we don't want
Mm-hmm.
them to assimilate.
Right.
They make a specific point to make sure that they keep their heritage and they do not water down their Islamic values and beliefs. That is why, if you'll notice, you'll still see a lot of imams and Muslims walking around with big beards, with red
Oh
in
yeah.
it, wearing,
Mm-hmm.
what we would call pajamas, because they
Mm-hmm.
want to make a point of not of. You've heard the term otherizing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big one here
Mm-hmm.
in Canada. To otherize, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be otherizing is supposed to be a bad thing. It's not good to otherize others.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the question becomes: are Muslims taught to otherize everyone who's not a Muslim? And I'll say yes. The Imams very clearly say those are the other, and we must maintain that they are the other, and we must not assimilate. Now, again, I come back to, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's not for me to say, but it is a thing. And people have to start understanding that. So I've had people say, yes, but if Muslims are coming to North America and into the West, shouldn't they like us? Shouldn't they appreciate Western civilization? And the big problem here is everyone keeps understanding or trying to understand Islam or Muslims from their perspective.
I agree.
And they don't, so
It's impossible. It's
it,
actually, Eric. I'm not a guy of impossibilities. I think everything has possibility. If you have enough time, money, energy, resources, you can probably get to possible. But unless you have got to have this, folks listening, when I talk about the 25-yard gap and closing this in society, about getting in rooms, if you're not a woman, then you better talk to women about what it's like to be a woman. If you're not black, you better talk to a black person about what it's like to be black. A lot of black people. You better talk to a lot of women. If you weren't raised poor and you were living from meal to meal, or your mother was picking up roadkill to feed you, you better talk to people like that so you understand their struggles. This, what Eric is talking about, might be one of the most difficult things in our human existence, is this closure with the Muslims, because it's hard to understand for people from the West because of culturally how we are. There is a lot of, in the Muslim religion, there's a lot of things that we think are restrictive. To them, it's very, absolutely, completely normal.
can I interrupt you, please?
Sure, yeah.
As a 6 year, I was 6 or 5 years old, and my sister, who's 3 years younger than me, so she was 2 or 3, she hit me like the way a 3-year-old girl would hit a 6-year-old boy, a brother, right? Some toys or something. So I hit her back, but not hard, but I hit her back. And my father said, "You do." He said something to me, and he instilled in me that you do not hit girls.
Right,
To which I responded, "Yeah, but she hit me first. And you're a little boy, but
right.
she hit me first. She took my toy." And he said, "Does it matter? You're a boy. Are boys stronger than girls?" And I said, "Well, yeah." So he instilled in me that no matter what, boys do not hit girls. That's like a cultural thing. So even when I was in school, 12 years old, 15 years old, if some girl freaked out or something, I just wouldn't hit her. It's very difficult for me to hit a girl. Even if she's attacking me, it's like I can't do it. The Islamic culture doesn't have that. There's
No,
fundamental differences that are
yes.
taught. That's the culture. So it's not about. So we come back to, and maybe
But
I'm jumping.
do we respect the culture, Eric? Or do
There,
we resist the culture because it's not our culture? Because all this is now you're into morality. I have some good female friends, and I'll be at a Home Depot, right? And just to make a point, because they haven't experienced this, just to make a point, I'll turn around sometimes and I'll go, "You're not two steps behind me." And they'll go, "What are you talking about?" Okay? And I say, "In some countries, if you don't remain two steps behind me everywhere I go," I said, "somebody will hit you with a stick in public." And they're like, "That's not true." And I'm like, "Oh, no, it's actually true. It's actually happening right now." And they said, "That's crazy." And I said, "So if you appreciate where you're at in life right now with what you have in your culture, then appreciate it, because it can be very, very different someplace else."
it could,
Does that make them wrong and us right?
that's another conversation. That's another conversation.
I think it's foundational to where you're going, because if you're gonna justify the Muslim culture, which is counterintuitive to Western culture, if you're going to justify the Muslim culture as it's their culture, then the conversation needs to go to how do you mix it? I want it because you've done the
Right,
work, so you tell
right.
us.
So again, that's what I come back to, and it's not a, so I my goal is to have conversations on this topic with those who are in the middle, with those who don't necessarily agree with me. And the only way I have found to be able to do that is to be less didactic, because people don't like people who say, I'm right, you're wrong, or I'm right and they're wrong. So I stay away from that now. All I say is, this is the way they do it, and I
Mm-hmm.
prefer not that way. It's a preference. So I'm
Can we
not going
live
to say,
together? What's the conclusion to your dissertation? What's your conclusion? Can we live together?
well, you see, now you're
Or is
asking me,
it well? Because this is I'm asking you the question that well, first of all, I'm putting myself in my listeners' minds, right?
well, okay,
And
so
they're gonna
no, let me answer. Let me answer. Okay, so then I answered that with a question. Simple. Can we live together? Well, so why is the West? Why is Western civilization as opposed to Middle Eastern civilization?
mm-hmm.
So, if you would prefer to have America and Canada more resemble Pakistan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Saudi Arabia, if you
Mm-hmm.
want that culture in America, fine. But it's going to be, or not. So there's a reason why I don't live in Pakistan and Afghanistan. There's a reason why people in Afghanistan and Pakistan are coming to Canada. There's not a lot of Canadians going there. So I don't answer direct questions that way, because I don't want people then to put me into a. And so now, from now on, whenever I get into a conversation with
Right.
someone can say, "Oh, that's the man who said this. He said this, that this is wrong. That Islam is
Right.
wrong." No, I don't say Islam is wrong. No, no, no. I'm saying Islam is Islam. That's it. And Western civilization is Western civilization. And there's a reason why in the past there was no Islam in Western civilization, and there was no Western civilization in Islamic civilization, because the two were oil and water. But for political reasons, whether you go back to what's in 1967 or 72 with the Immigration Act
Yeah.
with F. Kennedy or Robert Kennedy, one of those
Right.
guys, they changed all that. They blew it out of the water. So what we have, and a lot of people say, yeah, well, we've always had
Yeah, but
unification.
that time frame that you just described, there was also the 8 Day War going on.
Right.
So they're addressing it because there's this massive amount of violence based on thousands, not hundreds, thousands of years of philosophical and religious difference. So how do you close the gap, Eric? I mean, we've had a lot of smart people in front of this. And right now, we're killing thousands of people in the Middle East over
Well,
exactly what
but
you're
if
talking
I
about.
may, but again, you see, I think, and I'm going to push back against you now.
Sure, no,
you're
go ahead.
you're making this way more complicated than it actually is in terms of the Middle
Okay,
East and back a
and
thousand years
and
ago.
that's what I want you to do, because what I just said out loud is the majority of how people think when you talk about Muslim and Christianity and Eastern Muslim culture and Western
Okay, very
culture,
good.
and
So
when the
so
two
so
mix.
so so I what I try to do, and I become very good at, is I try to make things, again. We can have an expression in French. It's called "perter les nuages." It's like shoveling clouds. Like, it's all philosophical. It all sounds so nice, but you're shoveling clouds. But at some point, you come to reality, right? And if my number one objective as a father is to protect my children, my family, my wife, now, if you're going to try to convince me that there's, 30, 40, or 50 or 60 people coming up a hill to attack my family, if I have to, I'll wipe out those 80 people, because the most important thing is my family at some point. So at
Right.
some point, we have to simply ask ourselves, at the end of the day, do we want to survive as a civilization in this manner, or Are we prepared to wipe ourselves out to survive our civilization in another
Sure.
manner? At some point, that's going to be the question. Now, perhaps we're going to all vote and say, yeah, we want to wipe out our civilization, but let's have that conversation. So I just want to have the conversation. And I don't want to have, like I say, 1,000 years
I
ago,
love
what's
it.
going on. That's why when people bring up Palestine and Israel, I say, that's not my issue. I'm talking about here in Canada, in the mosque, this is what they're saying,
Yep.
this is what they want to do. Simple. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. But do people even know what's going on? What are they actually teaching in the private Muslim schools? Now,
What,
another interesting. Go ahead, sorry.
so what do you tell the person that says, I'm Canadian, I grew up here, they came here, they've got to do it our way?
What do I say? They got to do it our way.
Well, I mean, but you have Muslim neighbors. There's a mosque down the street. In fact, if I remember right, Toronto has a fairly significant mosque. There's
Big
a,
time.
I mean, it's yeah, and so does Calgary. Calgary's got a huge mosque. So
Mississauga also, yeah.
yeah. So what do you tell people when they're changing things or they want us to do this or
Well, what I
they're
tell
telling
well
my kids stuff first?
number one, those people who say what you just said are not the people that I talk to. I primarily want to talk to the people who say, well, all cultures are equal. Yes, well, it could be this, it could be that, and yeah, I don't agree that. Of course, we shouldn't beat women. That's not nice, and yeah, but at the end of the day, we all have to live together and love each other and be nice. That because the person who said what you just said, okay, he already has an opinion on what Islam is. I don't need to talk to that person.
He has an assumption and a bias.
Well, sure,
And assumptions and biases can be changed.
right, but it's not. But a person who has this assumption and this bias is not someone who I necessarily want to change his assumption and his bias. Because a bias implies already that you're in. A bias implies a little bit of bigotry. When we say the word bias, so for example,
Sure.
if I said I prefer Western civilization, I'm biased to the Western civilization. That's my bias. So
Well, of
interesting.
course.
No, I got to say, I just listened to a podcast with an imam, and he was saying that there's no such thing as an absolute neutrality. It's not possible. Everything has to be from your perspective. You have to have a perspective. So, for example, a judge is neutral, but within a framework of the law. Does that make sense? So
Oh,
he judges
yes.
but his neutrality is within the law, but that law is already a framework.
Yes.
So another judge is neutral within the framework of Sharia law, but he's neutral,
Hmm.
but within the framework. So there's no such thing
Yeah.
as an absolute neutrality.
No.
So we can only see the world from our perspective. We can only
Right.
see the world from our cultural group perspective at some point. So, for example, in the 70s, 60s, here in Canada, there was everyone celebrated Christmas. However, some families opened their gifts at midnight, and some
Yeah.
families waited until early morning.
We opened one gift at midnight, and then we had to get up and open the other. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but my point is, but we all still celebrated Christmas.
Right.
So within that framework, we were all of the same culture. We were all from the same perspective.
I love where you're going with this. In fact, you've already named the podcast "Shoveling Clouds." That was awesome. So, so I know because it's actually true. Because I think we do this without broadening our perspective and our understanding. Then we are really shoveling clouds, and we're not working from reality. And that's the name of the podcast. Quick story. When I married my wife, I grew up in Northern California, an agricultural area, so
Mm-hmm.
we had a lot of mosquitoes. And my wife we were at my mother's house, and there was this big bug that was on the window, big long-legged bug. It's not very attractive. And my wife had been complaining about mosquitoes, and then she smacked this bug and she killed it. And I said, "What are you doing?" And she goes, "Well, I killed this bug." And I said, "Well, why'd you kill the bug?" And she goes, "Well, it's nasty." I said, "That bug, we call that bug a mosquito eater. It eats 10 times its weight in mosquitoes every day."
Yeah.
She goes, really? And I said, yeah. I said, if you knew that, would you have killed the bug? She said, well, no, because there's a lot of mosquitoes.
Yeah.
Well, this is the phenomenon you're talking about. A lot of us see things in a certain way and it gets labeled. In my wife's case, nasty.
Mm-hmm.
Once she had a little bit more understanding about it, not that she didn't think it was still nasty, but she saw utility in it and she was willing to coexist with it because of something positive that it brought to the environment. That's
Mm-hmm.
I think that people fundamentally, when they're working off of this dynamic that you're talking about, can't quiet themselves enough. Be kind. Be like Jesus Christ. Be kind and quiet enough and graceful enough to accentuate the positive. Because I guarantee you, if you look at America, and Canada's similar, especially in your part of Canada, it's so melted anymore that when you look at cultures that come into cultures that come into cultures that come into cultures that make this big giant culture, when you look at that, people talk about a culture within a culture in one of two ways: positively or negatively. I grew up with Mexican immigrants, illegal aliens, whatever you want to call them. I grew up with them side by side, worked in the fields with them side by side. I will tell you, there's no better neighbors. There's no better God-fearing people. There's no better hard work people that of hard work. They're good God-fearing people. I grew up with their kids. I mean, they were my friends, lifelong friends.
Right. But at some
But look
point,
at but look at the narrative on illegal aliens now in America, and it's because people don't know. So I have a whole different perspective on immigration and those type of things because of how I grew up. So I love your conversation, but you got to give, because there's people right now, my good Christian brothers that I spend every Friday morning with, my good Christian brothers, and my church would say what I talked to you about, this separation between Isaac and Ishmael, and that's where that started. And the Muslim religion's on the wrong side of things because of rules, and there shouldn't have to be rules, but they are who they are. So how do we work together? How do we make it work?
well, the question is not how do we make it work, is that according to Islam, it cannot work. It must not work because Islam must defeat Christianity. And I have imams that I've downloaded who clearly say, and the hadith say, that the Prophet Muhammad destroyed the cross. The cross must be destroyed. There's another imam who says the hadith very clearly say church bells are the call of Satan. So if church bells are the call of Satan, if music is the call of Satan, and the hadith says it's incumbent upon all Muslims to break the cross, where do you go from there? Now, will all Muslims do that? I don't know. I don't know what the percentages of them, but that is the teaching. And
Mm-hmm.
it stands to reason that if that's the teaching and that's what's being preached, there are Muslims who believe that that's what Islam is. So the question is not how do we live together? The question is, do they even want to live with us? And apparently, clearly, they say they do not and they cannot. And it is incumbent upon them because it is the will of Allah that they should dominate and destroy Christianity. I'm not saying that. That's not my opinion. I mean, I have a YouTube short that I
This
put.
is this is valuable, Eric. I'm going to have you send me the links to your YouTube stuff, and we'll put it on the podcast when we send it out. This is really valuable, Eric, because a lot of people watch mainstream media in America, North America, and what they see? They see bombs, they see war, they see death, they see media spin stories. Children being affected, and no hospitals, and no food, and humanitarian crises. You see demonstrations at our universities for both sides. You see anti-Semitism. You see all of these things, and I think because you've taken the time, the courageous time, to truly understand something that concerned you. Because you could be in a whole different place. You could just be in a place of hate. I
Yes.
think even
Yes.
even even at that basic level, if you understand that Muslims think that it's in America would say it's their way or the highway, right?
Yes.
Um, If that's basically where they're coming from, at least that's a basic understanding of where they're coming from. Don't have to like it. Don't have to
Sure.
agree with it. You don't have to make them your best friends. You don't have to send your kids to their schools. They don't have to send your kids to, their kids to your schools, those type of things. But it's a going in. It's at least a basic understanding of a going in. And it's because you did the research. So let's expand that to humanity. How many? Because I think there's a lot of questions, and there's a lot of questions in our human interactions on a day-to-day basis, especially as leaders when we're trying to lead all kinds of people, different sizes, shapes, and colors and creeds. When we're doing that, we have to do the work. You got to do the work. You're more comfortable with society as it is in an integrated Muslim, Christian, non-Christian, atheist society that you're living in Toronto and we live in here every day. You're more comfortable with that because you understand it. I mean, you have to agree with it, but you have to do the work to understand it.
Well, and let me say, what you just said is correct. So 12 years ago, I was doing stuff like, you've heard of Draw Prophet Muhammad Day?
No.
Okay, so in May 1st, there was this thing, it was called, it's still done. I would go to downtown Toronto and I would have an easel and I would dress up and I would mock Islam openly mocking Islam on the corner, right where beside the
Mm-hmm.
Dawah booth where they were giving out Islamic books. Okay.
All right.
And I would be there on every second weekend, every third weekend, screaming and yelling about the dangers of Islam and how evil Islam is and this mocking. And I'd have like 70 or 80 Muslims standing around me, chomping at the bit to attack me. And I was attacked. I was thrown into the street. I was punched. Nobody ever got arrested, of course. I was assaulted. And on some level, I thought, metaphorically speaking, that if I poured gasoline on my head and lit myself on fire, right, then everybody would realize the truth because I was the bearer of the truth and I
Do
would
you know?
save.
I saw that for real in Iraq.
I'm sure you, yes.
I saw that.
Yeah, but the thing and the sad thing is nothing changes when somebody lights themselves on fire.
No.
Nothing
No.
happens.
It's a long-term solution to a short-term emotional problem.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, it's not good.
So on some level, was I venting? Was I, like, and then when you're doing all of this screaming and yelling, you get like an adrenaline rush, and you got 70 people
Sure.
around you, and the cameras
Yeah.
are there, and it's all mixed up all together, right? And so it's and a good friend of mine, who became my friend, helped me to change my direction big time. He actually maybe
Sure.
saved me. It was like I was the Pied Piper. I was going to lead, St. Patrick with the flute and leading all the snakes out.
I
And then,
just
so I came to realize that that was foolish. And that's when I went on a new journey. That's when I specifically said I was an Islamophobe, I changing, new page, I was wrong, I
right.
apologize for my past indiscretions, and I am now on a journey to discover the true, authentic Islam, and I will share
Right.
that journey with you, the audience. Thank you for joining
Right.
me. Goodbye. I made that statement several times, and that's how I
So
approach this. I
tell me,
share.
you did a significant amount of time in prison.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What
Three
what
years.
would do time?
Well, actually, I read the Quran three times from front to back and made notes and actually wrote out the verses of the Quran. So I can actually say I read the Quran three times. How many people can say that? Not many. So that was beneficial. Other than that, that's how I made use of my time in terms of, so as opposed to being defeated, like I'm in jail now, I'm defeated, I'm crushed. I said no, I have to use my time wisely. And so I was in jail. I was able to get a Quran, and every day I
What
read it for 3-4 hours.
what was the first thing you did when you got out of jail?
Other than personal things, you mean, or
Well, I mean, tell me. I mean, yeah. I mean, obviously, you went and probably ate something that you wanted to eat, and went to a
yeah,
quiet place, or had to take a shower by yourself, all that other stuff. But yeah, no, I mean, I get that. But I mean, what was the? I mean, when so you've done 3 years of studying the Quran, and you're out of jail. You went into jail because of your thoughts on the Muslim, beliefs.
okay. So
You
so
study the Quran, you come out of jail. What do you do?
well, so I Came out of jail. By the way, I was denied bail 3 times while in jail. For
Who threw you in jail? The government?
the government, yeah, the prosecutor. So like, I
Okay.
didn't punch anyone, I didn't kick anyone, I didn't
No,
steal anyone,
no,
sold no drugs.
no,
It was just
no,
none of that. No, no.
no. You were thrown in jail for exercising free speech.
Well, political, yeah, political.
Okay.
So when I
Sure.
came out of jail, I was on bail after my 4th attempt, and the prosecutor, they had what they call a preliminary hearing, which is with my lawyer, the Crown, and the judge got together to discuss the trial. At which
Sure.
point the judge said, I want this to go away, because a lot of people didn't really want this trial to take place. The prosecutor, however, who took a very personal interest in this case, because it's highly charged,
Sure.
highly political, she said she was going to have a hearing to revoke my bail because I was a danger to society. However, if I were to plead guilty to causing a disturbance, she would no longer seek to revoke my bail. So I went to the trial to plead guilty, at which point I put on social media that we were going to have an Islamophobia party. So we walked from the courthouse, and about 25 people showed up to my Islamophobia party from various parts of Ontario, some of which I'd never met before, people.
Sure.
And all of them were like 35, 40, 50 years old, no leather jackets, like people who took the day off work to come with
Sure.
me. So we had signs that said no to Islam, Islam is terrorism, still a little bit on the foolish side. And we walked and we marched with about 10 cops on bikes beside us,
Sure.
because it was because they knew we were going to do this. It was on
Yeah.
social media.
Yeah.
So we went to the mosque and we held up our sign, and some people had loudspeakers. We were there for 40 minutes. Then we left. Within half an hour, the media in Toronto blew up. The
I
mayor,
bet.
everybody was making tweets about how we denounce hatred at this mosque, and what they did was Islamophobia. These are evil people. They're bad people. And now the police were discussing laying hate crime. And 2 ladies came from Alberta, Calgary, and flew in to come to my Islamophobia party, who I did not know. The media and the police were discussing laying hate crime charges against us for standing outside a mosque
Right. Right.
with signs. Simple. It turns out that very mosque, somebody did research on this mosque's YouTube channel. The mosque themselves prayed, Allah, purify Al-Aqsa Mosque from the filth of the Jews, wipe them out one by one, and spare none of them.
Yeah.
So when that story broke, like within 12 hours, all of a sudden, the police, no more hate crime charges against us because of what because it's all political.
I wanted you to tell that. I wanted you to tell that because I'm not even going to comment on it. But I want it to be near the end here. I'm going to give you 2 minutes just to kind of wrap us up. But I wanted that to be to the end. Everybody that's listening, I want you to rewind this and listen to Eric's journey. I knew where that was going to go. I knew exactly what was going to happen. And I want them to listen to that, and I want them to apply it to their lives as leaders, their lives as family, wherever you fit in your family, father, sister, brother, wherever you fit. I want you to apply Eric's lessons in there. Because one thing Eric didn't do is he didn't go to prison and come out 3 years later and say, well, I'll go be Muslim. He didn't abandon his thoughts, and he exercised his free speech. And guess what? In the end, something happened, and all the flies went away, and everybody left Eric alone. So if that doesn't sound familiar to maybe what our country's gone through over the last 9 years with our political leaders, regardless of what side you're on, this is not a pro-Republican or Democrat thing, but we really need to think about where our energy and effort and our time goes. And we need to believe in ourselves. Kangaroos do; they have to. So, Eric, give us some words of wisdom, leaving all of this, macro stuff.
Well, what I wanted to, what I think I've learned, most importantly, is just because you think you're fighting doesn't mean, for example, how can I explain this? what is my mission ultimately? What is my ultimate victory? As opposed to skirmishes, little battles.
Right.
So you can
Right.
win a battle, you can lose a battle, but that doesn't mean
Mm.
you're any closer to whatever is victory.
Right.
And sometimes we mistake the two. We think that if we're fighting and we're screaming and we're yelling, or we're, if we're just fighting, that's bringing us closer to a victory. Not necessarily. Sometimes little skirmishes bring you backwards. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's best not to fight and to just regroup, rethink, reorganize, and re-strategize. And sometimes you can be more effective with other methods. So the question we have to ask ourselves, in whatever it is that we're trying to achieve, how effective are we being? Because we all have limited resources. I don't have endless resources. So where am I going to put them? And that's
I
why I
love
took
it.
a step back and I
I love
reassessed.
it.
And so now I write books. I'm
Yeah.
going to be my fourth book. I'm doing other work that's much
Yeah.
more effective than screaming and yelling on a street corner, getting a lot of hits and likes and YouTube, a lot of, like we call a tempest in a teapot. Okay, so what?
Yeah. I
Simple.
love it.
Sometimes it's best to step back
I love it.
and
Some
you
of
keep
that's
moving
growing up, isn't
forward.
it?
But you keep moving forward. But sometimes you need to take a step. I think in the army, which you are familiar with, is called
Yeah.
strategic. What do you call it? Retreat?
Yeah. Strategic retreat. Well, and in the military we call it a strategic pause too. Where you stop.
Sure.
You just stop, and all that is just thinking space, right? You get rid of it. You stop. You get some rest, figurative and literal rest. You stop. You build thinking space, right, so that you're not
Mm-hmm.
reactionary. You can actually be strategic and have a plan, and then you right, you replan, you retool yourself
Mm-hmm.
before you go
Yes.
forward. And so strategic pause is important. It's important in life. It's important, especially as fast as everything goes with social media and everything. It's very important. So,
I've
Eric, you're the
enjoyed this.
best.
I've
This
enjoyed
is
this immensely. Thank you.
just tremendous. No, thank you, because people are really trying to struggle with trying to understand this, and I have and I am not as schooled in this as you are, but I've been fortunate enough to live there
Well,
and
if I'd like
experience it,
to add
and so
this is everyone is in shock by what's going on in Europe, Germany, France, etc.
yes,
And for me and us and a few people like myself who are, the question is not we're it's just a question of, but of course it's happening. It had to happen. It's obviously that's where it was going. So 10 years ago I was with my camera recording demonstrations here in Toronto where they were
right,
screaming global intifada, bring the intifada.
yeah, yeah,
10 years ago. And 10 years ago no one cared much about that.
right,
But they were screaming global intifada here in the streets of Toronto. Okay.